'Tis the season to be jolly, but also stressed. The holiday season is in full swing, and for some people, this is the most wonderful time of the year, but for others, not so much. Between holiday meltdowns, mishaps, and health emergencies that may come, it's important to find ways to know what to do and manage stress this holiday season. And keep in mind the reason of the season, to be present and with loved ones. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Jonathan Fialkow, Chief Population Health Officer at Baptist Health South Florida, and we're coming to you live from the Baptist Health Newsroom. We have with us today 3 experts from the Baptist Health family, and they're going to talk about how to avoid our previously mentioned holiday mishaps and emergencies and combat stress this season. I'm pleased to welcome Janelle Falcon, a behavioral health specialist at Baptist Health. Great to see you, Janelle.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Dr. Eli Friedman, who's the medical director of sports cardiology at the Miami Cardiac and Vascular Institute. Happy to have you, Eli.
Thanks, Jonathan. Good to see you again.
And Dr. Ladan Pourmasiha, who's the medical director of the Baptist Health Urgent Care. Pleasure to have you, Ladan.
Thank you so much, John. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for all of you for being here. And before we dive into today's subject, I want to remind our viewers to send in any questions or comments throughout the segment. We're here for you and happy to answer any questions you may have. Janelle, let's kick it off with you. I think there has been an increased awareness about the increased stress and anxiety that comes from holiday season. We've seen it for many years in our cardiology practice, the kind of things people would come in with and the heightened tension. Can you tell us a little bit what is it about the holiday season that leads to that anxiety and the nervousness in a more acute way?
I mean, there's so many contributors when it comes to stress and anxiety around the holidays. I would say the first one that really comes to mind is just financial stressors. Most people are attending so many more events, if it's just dinners or, just things at work, right? They're going to potlucks and having to gift gifts. So there's a raised financial stressor, and just being really more around family and friends and things like that, and feeling like there's no escape when there's all these tough conversations coming up, whether it's around insecurity or even just politics and things like that. And they feel like they just can't get away from it.
I think, and absolutely correct, that financial pressure and stress and the expectation is something that we dive into patients. Also, don't you think it's a time thing that everyone has full-time jobs and other obligations, then they have to squeeze in extra time? I mean, and the roads are crowded. I mean, it's just really a complex condition, a complex situation, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. There's so many things to juggle all at once. And the normal day-to-day responsibilities don't go away.
Yeah, wonderful. Ladan, and people may know what they're experiencing. They may not realize, what we're seeing and from the medical standpoint. Do you see an uptick in, let's say, emergency room and urgent care visits during this time of the year?
Absolutely. This is that time where we see that uptick. And the reason behind it generally is just the fact that we don't have the primary care physicians that readily available. And so people use the urgent cares and the ERs as that source of care for sure. And the other thing is that what we're seeing with a lot of the patients is that they're coming in and it's the holidays and we want to celebrate, but it's also the winter months. And so we see that uptick because during the winter months, we are in flu season and we're seeing a lot of the flus and the RSVs and now this new bad boy, which is COVID. So we're seeing upticks for several reasons, actually.
So some seasonal things regarding to medical conditions, and you're seeing people are using the emergency rooms or urgent care that, in your experience, might be handled in primary care, but because of hours or access, they
exactly
they want to take care of. Yeah,
absolutely. The access isn't there. And then, within the holidays, there's certain things that we do that kind of leads us into the urgent cares and the ERs. And some of it is just that lax dietary restrictions that we have now, right? And we also don't really pay attention to our allergies. And so we go to these events, we don't pay attention to those things. We eat the salty foods, we eat the fatty foods. And, if you have chronic conditions like high blood pressure and diabetes, that could be kind of dangerous. And that's where we start to see the patients kind of come in.
And something else we recommend is make sure patients have their pills, make sure their prescriptions don't run out during
refills is a big thing for us. And people are so engulfed in shopping lists and making sure that they're making their travel plans that they forget to see their primary care doctors and get those refills before it's Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And all of a sudden now they don't have the medicines that they need. So absolutely, being prepared is a key component.
So Eli, the other guests set the stage about the drivers of a lot of the stress anxiety we see. Let's get to some of the medical components of that. And from a cardiology standpoint, what are the significant things we are concerned about or we're aware of that stress can lead to regarding any kind of heart conditions?
I think anything to excess is always a concern. And as the other guests have alluded to already, going to extremes on diet, maybe alcohol and other things, parties, staying up late at night, can certainly have cardiometabolic effects and exacerbate any underlying conditions that are there. But I think it's important to mention also, it's funny that we keep saying this is a stressful time. I also think it's a really happy time, and it's a time to enjoy things as well. And certainly that's good for mental health. So I think it's all about moderation, setting limits. And certainly for those of us in the cardiology world who deal with patients who have conditions that we need to be wary of, setting some limits and some boundaries is helpful there too.
I think that's well said. We're not here to scare people and make them miserable during a holiday time. We're giving them little tips to be able to predict and anticipate and prevent the bad stuff so they can enjoy the holiday time together, which is very well
correct. Yeah, right. And this is the first time in the last 3 years where maybe we have a little bit of flexibility to be able to do that. That's not to make light of the respiratory viruses that are still circulating, and flu and influenza has been terrible, as has RSV and COVID. That, again, not to make light of that at all, but I think we all have the handcuffs off to a certain extreme at this point in time, and we're able to enjoy in ways we haven't before. So it's important to take some time and reflect on what really matters too.
And any comments on stress in general and cardiovascular consequences? We talk about the acute time of the year around the holidays, but just general, how do we address patients?
Yeah, stress is kind of like a fire, right? It can burn your house down or it can keep it warm. And so I think we can't eliminate stress entirely. It's how we deal with it and how we manage it. To me, the best mental health medication is exercise, getting outside, sunlight. We're fortunate to be in South Florida where it's still sunny and the weather's great. This is a time to make the most of being outdoors, as opposed to summer where it actually may be more dangerous than winter in certain other areas. So I think getting outside, managing the stress, exercise, being around loved ones and enjoying the good times can help us with the stress.
So Janelle, transitioning back to you, and again, not to lead with a bad thing, but to give people tools and weapons to be aware for their own health and maybe that of a loved one. Let's talk about the concept of seasonal depression, which is a real phenomenon, and how it's hyperacute this time of year. What is seasonal depression? What does it mean, and how do you address it with patients?
So also known as seasonal affective disorder, right? But it is a depressive disorder. It just has seasonal patterns, and usually we see it around this time of year, going into fall or winter. And really that has to do with the fact that we're seeing less daylight. And going back to the idea that it is a depressive disorder. So we're seeing all those depressive symptoms. We're seeing a lot more sadness. We'll see appetite changes. We'll see a lot more fatigue. We'll see disturbances in sleep and things like that. Some people will experience more of a milder form. Some people will see a bigger impact, right, in some of those disturbances in their day-to-day lives. So how they interact with other people, how it impacts their mood, their thoughts, and things like that. And if we're seeing a bigger impact, I think that's when I step in and I really encourage people to speak to a mental health professional like myself, or speak to even their primary care physician to try and get them to the best place, or if that's medications, whatever it is.
So I think it's a very interesting disorder, very interesting concept. And as you said, it's from light. It's not from weather or cold or anything like that. And there's a lot of thought that when people from the Northeast come down to South Florida, it's, then they won't get that, but, still more darkness and still occurs as you're seeing. Can people do anything at home? And I agree, if someone really is experiencing symptoms significantly, they should speak to a mental health professional or primary care doctor. Anything people can do at home to avoid it? Any tips you may have that people can do to use it?
There is some research around like a UV lamp that people can put in their homes. I would encourage people to read a little bit more about it, because you don't want to just keep it on all day. It can mess up with your sleep cycle, things like that, even vitamin D supplements. I think you all can speak a little bit more to that too. But really focusing around like exercise, getting yourself out of the home, focusing too on your sleep cycles if you're oversleeping or undersleeping, things like that to get you moving and going and not being too sedentary.
So as a last follow-up on this topic, and if you don't want to answer it, it's okay. I'm not won't be the first time I ask something a little too provocative. Can people feel perfectly well and function normally and then have seasonal affective disorder? Or is there generally some underlying depressive type disorder that's exacerbated, or both?
I think both, right? There are some people with a family history that it becomes a risk for them to fall into the seasonal depression disorder, right? But they feel great all year round, and then they just kind of fall into this. Or there's people that just, they don't feel all that great throughout the year, and then it just kind of gets exacerbated throughout the seasons too. So I think we can see a kind of mixture of both things.
Yeah, so one shouldn't, they should be looking for the signs, not to be hypervigilant, but because they don't feel depressive symptoms in the past doesn't mean it can't happen. So certainly be aware.
I would say be open to feedback from the people around you too. They're giving you feedback because they care, because usually we don't see the signs in ourselves. It's usually the people around us that are best at picking up these signs.
Eli, back to the heart, which seems to bear the brunt of a lot of stress and anxiety. There's a term holiday heart. I know we know what it means and we deal with it, but I do know it's out in the community. I've seen it in trade magazines and stuff. Can you speak a little bit about what holiday heart is?
Yeah, typically going back to the excess discussion, somebody drinks a little too much alcohol, shows up in the emergency room that night or the next day in an arrhythmia, most commonly atrial fibrillation, which is the most common irregular rhythm anywhere in the world. But again, I would argue that holiday heart can also be extended to other cardiovascular conditions and exacerbations of excess that then lead to hospitalization or require acute medical treatment. And it is something we see, to be sure. Certainly excess sodium, excess alcohol are the big players that we see most frequently.
And what would be fascinating is, when we would have our hospital coverages for cardiology, on the holiday, it'd be empty, right? No one was coming in unless they really had. And then the next day was the busiest day. The day after New Year's, the day after Christmas was the busiest day. And a big component was either people waiting, not wanting to be in the hospital during the holiday, which is a concern as well. If you have a medical condition and you feel it's an emergency, go to the emergency room. Don't wait until after the holiday. But again, the consequences of that indulgence, and it's real. Are the cardiac consequences, the holiday heart, permanent? Or do they resolve, or again, mixed bag?
I think depends on the individual who's there and depends on the individual prior to all of it happening. So certainly we see it in young, healthy people who have no pre-existing medical conditions and show up, and, we deal with it on a one-time basis, or able to counsel on, setting limits, and things go quite well thereafter. But again, I think, for those who have chronic cardiovascular conditions or chronic medical conditions in general, excess can definitely exacerbate that and perhaps send that person on a trajectory that they otherwise would not have been on. And as you allude to, delaying care because of a holiday can be damaging in that respect as well. Being the Jewish guy who works Christmas every year, I can tell you the hospitals are quiet, and then I take off for New Year's and come back to a completely different hospital. So it is something to be aware of and to seek care if you are concerned. You can always celebrate the holiday a week later.
Well, the best part of my professional trajectory is to hand that off to you. The holidays on call. But we would see people who waited too long and had much more cardiac damage and concerns. So that's a good call out.
Yes.
Ladan, there's certain, let's say, preventable things that one may go to the emergency room, and non-preventable things. Someone's got a respiratory illness, pneumonia, et cetera. Obviously, it's non-preventable. What are the more kind of preventable things you would see? And specifically, injuries from falling while you're putting together your Christmas tree, or running with gifts and tripping, or even, GI concerns, abdominal pain, diarrhea, maybe from ingesting, kids or whatever, ingesting things. What are the more common things you see around holiday time in emergency room that you wouldn't see otherwise? And secondly, what can people do to avoid those potential medical problems?
So we definitely see our injuries. And, one of the biggest things we like to do is give these holiday hazard tips. And so one of them is just, clearing your walkways, because what happens is that in the house and out of the house during the holidays, everything is a mess. So we want toys out of the way. Outside where you have your decorations, we want these electrical cords out of the way, especially if you're going to have visitors. And a lot of us get our elderly grandparents coming, and they can't bounce back from these slip and falls like we do. So that's one of the things that we see is a lot of slip and falls. In Florida, we still like to hang our decorations, right? And so we get on this ladder, but it's Florida, it's hot, and we love to wear our sandals. And so we recommend for people to wear these slip-resistant shoes and protective shoes instead of these sandals when they get on these ladders, because we see a lot of falls from ladders as well. And by wearing sandals, not only are you more at risk of falling, but then we see puncture wounds, because now you're stepping onto and falling onto some of these decorative items. symptoms that we have as well. And then, of course, we see a lot of our lacerations because now it's cooking time, right? Everybody has guests and everything. And so we take out our sharp equipment and we don't realize where we put them, or we're working against time and chopping as fast as we can. And we have to realize that we have to slow down, still get organized, and have a safe zone, even in our kitchens, where we put all our cutleries there. And then we see our burns, right, John? And so we say all the hot dishes and the liquids, don't put them on low tables, which is where people like to put them and have people see how beautiful it looks. Put them on the back counter in the kitchen where it's not accessible, and make sure if there's children and toddlers that the kitchen is a no-go zone. Because again, we see a lot of children, because we are busy, getting injured. Christmas trees are huge, right? Big part of our decor. And we say if you have pets or children, make sure that you put a little fence around that Christmas tree so that it's not in the way of sitting areas and walking areas, because those can be choking hazards for our children.
So we may not be in a community where we have a lot of snow shoveling incidents, but you still see quite a few injuries.
We do, absolutely. And, and as our cardiologist mentioned as well, with the alcohol use and the consumption of that, we see a lot of people coming in either with alcohol poisoning or even some type of dehydration and hungover. And so we always say, too much of something is not a good thing. And that leads to car accidents that are very prevalent, and then slip and falls and lacerations as well.
So we want people to enjoy themselves, enjoy being with their family, celebrate, but be mindful of
everything in moderation.
Exactly. Janelle, let's move a little bit more into like the tips and being a little more perspective and what people can do. And again, knowing that it's a stressful time, what would you recommend for people, and both the viewers as well as perhaps loved ones that they may have in whom they may have impact, that they can do to maintain a calmness? You mentioned a few things, exercising, etc. Tell us a little bit what you would recommend to people. Say, hey, do it all the time, but certainly this time of year, this is how you can, these are some coping skills or means of remaining calm during the season.
I think one of my umbrella ones is kind of setting your boundaries and setting them pretty early, right? It encompasses so many things. It's setting boundaries when it comes to your self-care and your balance. So even including whatever those coping skills are going to be, if it's going to be exercising, setting that alone time for yourself. It includes also setting that budget for yourself so that you're not spreading yourself too thin and really stressing out about how you're going to bounce back after the holidays are over. And really trying to set that alone time for yourself and making sure that you're okay, making sure your needs are met. Yes, you're spending time with everybody else that you love, but also making sure that at the end of the day, you feel okay with yourself when you're laying your head on that pillow and sleeping okay at the end of the night, right? And also just enjoying your time with everyone. Yes, things are stressful, but you also get to enjoy this wonderful time that usually doesn't come around too often throughout the year, that everybody gets to be together in the same room.
Again, great tips. I'm smiling because, again, I would have these conversations over the years with my patients, and we talked about the financial stress, we talked about the time stress. And they're also family dynamics, right? Oh, I can't believe my sister-in-law is going to be there. And I can't, so I think the more one can anticipate, plan their shopping, plan the things they have to do, take advantage of the positives, the better it will be. Sometimes we go through the motions and we don't really appreciate those positives.
And it's important, like you're saying, planning it, really getting ahead of it and thinking it through what it might look like. Because once you're in the situation, then you're just reacting. Right? You're playing defense at that point. So if you plan it out, things might go a little bit smoother.
So Eli, over to you. And again, some of these things we touched on in a couple of different components, especially on moderation. The intense food, the amount of food obviously can affect cardiac conditions and affect people's health around the holidays. And we see this. Any particular kinds of foods that we've been more concerned about? And secondly, similarly, basic recommendations during these holiday times regarding particularly what they eat.
Yeah, again, I think the vast majority of people are going to be fine. And there's the ups and downs of diet. And I'm a big proponent of cheating, especially during happy times. I think sodium's the big one that can certainly offset things. Alcohol, we've talked about as well. But just being balanced in that too, understanding that excess is never good at any standpoint. And repetitive exposures to excess also can lead to increasing morbidity or illness as a result of that as well. So again, I think a thorough understanding of what your medical conditions are, be it blood pressure, cholesterol, or diabetes, comorbidities, and understanding how what you may eat and how you fuel your body could exacerbate those conditions is important. And if you have questions about it, talk to your healthcare provider, because they can help guide you and help you set some limits as well.
And well said. Certainly being mindful of what you're eating, you want to enjoy, as you said, it's nothing wrong with indulging at certain times and whatnot. But if you plan it, you could appreciate as what you eat and not get caught up in overstuffing yourself. And then especially if you have other medical conditions.
Yeah. And then don't let it spill over to become a habit, and, just set this time aside to say, okay, here's my time to enjoy and cheat. Great. Become day X, it's back on the grind and back to being a little bit more disciplined.
I'm seeing reports that someone gains about a pound to a pound and a half every holiday season, but they don't lose it. So it's an accumulative thing. So certainly if one indulges, get back.
That speaks to New Year's resolutions, which I'm not a big fan of, because we resolve to do these things. You can start whenever. It doesn't need to happen on January 1st. So, just get the habits, get in the routines of doing these things. Don't make it some big grandiose proposition that's going to happen on January 1st every year.
A couple of final questions that I have, and again, you guys have been wonderful experts and passionate about the conversations, and certainly within your expertise and experience. So, Ladan, let's talk about people who travel. We in South Florida get a lot of people traveling who wind up with medical conditions, and we have to see them and take care of them. Sometimes, to the extent of hospitalizations and surgeries, but obviously more often than not, things we can triage. And then similarly, we have a lot of South Floridians who might be traveling elsewhere. Any particular trends you see or recommendations in people who are traveling regarding the holiday time and preparing? What if they get injured? What if they get sick?
So, yes. So, we keep talking about preparedness, and that is such a key component. I always tell people, just as much as you're preparing your luggage with your favorite clothes and your favorite shoes, another thing that you need to make sure you're preparing very clearly is your first aid kit. Because when we travel to places, we don't know what is around us. And so we want to make sure we have some essentials with us when we're traveling. And I tell a lot of the patients to make sure that travel kit has their, anti medications for diarrhea, for example, because we can get diarrhea when we travel. Make sure we have our Tylenol, our Motrin, for if we get pains and fevers and so forth, and just some of the medications that we may not have on hand. And then the other thing that I always recommend is before we travel to make sure what urgent cares and ERs are near us, because it's not a good idea to feel sick and have pain and have to start calling around to see where is open and what's accessible. So I would definitely say to make sure you know what's around you. And then the third thing that I would say as a tip for people that are traveling, or for people that travel to come and see us, is to make sure that their information is readily available for our healthcare professionals. Because when you're not feeling good and you have a broken bone, you may not be able to answer those questions about your past medical history and your allergies. So whether you have it on a badge or whether you have it on your phone, make sure you have that so that we can all treat you accordingly.
Great advice. We actually have a Go kit, and my wife has it prepared, and we use it all. Just grab it, take it when we travel. Can't forget phone chargers and other things in that Go kit as well. But that's great advice. So last question, which I'm going to open to all of you, and then we'll hopefully have time to take a question too from the audience that came in. And the questions of what are the kind of symptoms or signs one may have, which might be showing evidence of something stress related or holiday related, and you can each speak towards your area of expertise or your experience. So Janelle, specifically, what are the kind of specific signs someone may see regarding any kind of behavioral health type of concerns?
I think it's also common, especially with anxiety or stress. We see a lot of like the physical aches, pains, especially chest pains, I would say, and shortness of breath. That's one of the common occurrences that clients will report.
Eli, anything you want to add to that? It would make sense. A little difficulty breathing.
Yeah, I think cardiovascular perspective, obviously difficulty breathing, racing heartbeats, chest discomfort, fainting. These are all things that warrant attention. One thing I'll mention also, just stepping out of my zone here just a little bit, is that understanding that the holidays can be tough for people. Also, no family members around, somebody's been lost. It's okay to feel those ways, and it's important really to recognize that and get some support. So I think although this is a happy time, lots of people will struggle with mental health in that respect too. So if someone is feeling sad, lonely, depressed, those sorts of things, to ask for some help, because there are people available, crisis lines, et cetera, that can help out immediately. Well
said. And then Ladan, anything you want to add, obviously, besides the traumatic type of visits?
Absolutely. And I think that they nailed it when they were talking about the different signs and symptoms. But I will tell you that on holidays, we actually do see our fair share of patients. And aside from these symptoms, some of them will come and talk about symptoms that they may have had 2 years ago and they don't necessarily have right now, but they want to speak with someone. They don't want to be alone during these times. And so they'll find a reason to come in. And that in itself is a sign that, we need to get in there. We need to step in and make sure that they're doing okay.
That's well said. Sometimes the holidays will trigger someone saying, I don't want this to get worse during the holidays, so let me get this thing evaluated. And as I said, some people don't want to be alone as well, Eli, which you pointed out, which we have to recognize as well. A couple of quick questions from the viewers, and then we'll wrap up. Eli, I'll turn this over to you because obviously some of this has cardiovascular consequences. Are there certain foods or substances that might make someone more anxious?
Yeah, it's a good question. Alcohol definitely can do it. Caffeine is a big one. And then there are certain studies out there that say marijuana may make people more anxious as well. And certainly other recreational drugs can do it. So don't want to maybe try something new that may make you uncomfortable. And again, if you're thinking about experimenting with something, I would recommend talking to a physician beforehand to see if it can exacerbate it. But yes, those are the big ones that come to mind immediately. And again, it's a season of excess. So be careful with that excess.
So, Ladan, you mentioned in some of the introductory comments, very well said, that a lot of times people can't get in to see their primary, or the primary offices are closed, so they use urgent cares and maybe even subsequently ERs. What do you think? What recommendation would you have for people to avoid that, if you will? Get seen if you're having a problem early, and secondly, if someone has a situation and they can't get into the primary for various reasons, what are the options that you would what are the options they have, and what would you recommend they go through in a stepwise approach to get taken care of?
Well, I mean, we're always open and ready to see our patients, and we're going to try to help them out. And so, when it comes to refilling prescriptions, depending on the prescription, we're able to do it, especially if it's medications that's related to high blood pressure and things that they'll really need at the time. So my biggest recommendation is before the holidays even hit to make sure that you've followed up with your primary care doctor and gotten at least enough medications for that holiday supply. But if not, yes, urgent cares are open. And another option is also telehealth. You can also contact through telehealth. We have care on demand, and speak to them about your needs and so forth. And even if you ultimately end up needing to be seen in person, at least this is some type of virtual guide to send you in the right direction.
So that's great resources. Telehealth for something that you're not sure of, you need some basic advice. Urgent care if you want to be seen, clearly an emergency room if it's a severe condition. And let's not forget, obviously, if someone can't breathe or has chest pain, call 911, and they'll make that decision for you, which will make it easy as well. So again, great advice. Similarly, a Janelle question from the audience. Are there any foods that can increase one's depression? Dr. Eli answered about anxiety. Anything?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I don't know that answer.
Yeah, I have no problem with it. Just,
I truthfully don't know. I think I'm just a firm believer in listening to your body and see how your body reacts to different things. I think that's how I'll respond. I know I'm sensitive to certain things, so I stay away from those things. That's all I have.
So honestly, guys, this has been a great conversation. We can go on with lots of other questions, but in the interest of time, I'll just throw it to each of you. For any final comments or recommendations, or just reiterating something that's been said already. Eli, you want to give some closing thoughts or comments, or bring up something that we might have not discussed?
Yeah, no, grateful to be here and appreciate the time. I think, again, try to enjoy it as much as possible. Feel free to indulge once in a while. If you have concerns about what indulgement means, speak to your physician or healthcare professional. And then again, as we discussed, this can be a difficult time for others. So if you have personal signs of mental health or concerns regarding your mental health, or worried about domestic abuse, et cetera, because those do go up during this time of year as well, reach out, get somebody some help. There's crisis lines. There's people who are available now more than ever, especially. I think our awareness has increased, and it's really important.
Thanks, Ladan. Any final comments or anything we may have missed?
So I would say my final message is as we start to prepare and gather to see our loved ones, that we're all mindful of keeping ourselves safe and our family members and going out there and getting the flu vaccines that are available. We have the bivalent COVID vaccine that's available to kind of decrease our chances of getting at least these respiratory viruses and also decrease our chances of transmitting these viruses as well, so that we can actually enjoy this festive season, right?
So a tinge of prevention can go a long way. So,
Absolutely.
and then last but not least, Janelle, any final comments?
Last but not least, I would just say, while this is one of the happiest times of year, keep in mind that, yes, it can be stressful. It can be anxiety inducing. Acknowledge all of those feelings and just try and be a little preventative in the sense of come up with a plan for yourself. How are you going to deal with all of these things? How are you going to practice self-care and do all of that while still enjoying the moment for what it is? And if you feel like you're overwhelmed, then reach out for extra support, whether it's a mental health professional, your primary care physician, or family and friends.
So nothing wrong with preparing and maybe working to avoid certain negative components, but enjoy the time with family, enjoy the time of year, and stay mindful of the positives. Great discussion, guys. And to our viewers, remember, be sure to hit that subscribe button on our channel here to keep you up to date with the latest health and wellness information and tips from our experts. You can also connect with us on our social media channels. That's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and LinkedIn. And check out our resource blog for the latest news at baptisthealth.net/news. You'll find a link there to all the episodes of the Baptist Health podcast as well. On behalf of everyone at Baptist Health, stay safe, stay healthy, happy holidays, and thanks for watching.